Welcome, friends! Let's talk about the social psychological phenomenon behind why so many are prejudiced towards others. But first, I'll explain something called groupthink, a psychological phenomenon where the desire for conformity within a group results in poor, irrational, or dysfunctional decision-making. Individuals may suppress their own opinions and avoid raising objections or fail to critically evaluate their behaviors and those of others in favor of consensus, often resulting in harmful outcomes. This typically occurs in groups where the pressure to maintain consensus outweighs the need for dissent or critical thinking. An example of this would be continued confidence in faulty studies or news reports, despite emerging evidence proving them unreliable. When a group maintains a unified stance without critically evaluating new data, it can suppress the truth or lead to negative outcomes. And a related phenomenon to groupthink is something called pluralistic ignorance. This occurs when individuals mistakenly believe their own thoughts, feelings, or behaviors differ from those of the group they belong to. This psychological phenomenon can lead to people conforming to perceived norms that aren't actually widely shared. Essentially, each person assumes they're the only one with certain doubts or attitudes, leading them to behave in a way that reinforces an incorrect group consensus. A common example of this is seen in classrooms when a student who doesn't fully understand a concept feels hesitant to ask a question. They look around and see no one else is raising their hand, so they assume that everyone must understand the material perfectly. In reality, others are also lost, but they too are waiting for someone else to ask a question first. This creates a situation where everyone privately feels confused, but no one speaks up, because each person believes they're the odd one out. This can also be witnessed in cults, where many people might privately disagree with something happening within the group, but since no one else seems to be objecting, they don't either. And if you can think of any other examples of this, let us know in the comments, but let's move on to another potentially dangerous social phenomenon called the Gollum effect, which occurs when low expectations are placed on individuals or groups, leading to poorer performance. Essentially, when people are believed to be less capable or are given less support or encouragement, they often perform worse, fulfilling those negative expectations. This can happen in environments like schools or workplaces, for example. If a teacher or manager believes a student or employee is incapable of performing well and shows little encouragement or positive attention towards them, the student or employee may internalize those low expectations and as a result struggle to succeed. And the opposite of the Gollum effect would be the Pygmalion effect, which is a psychological phenomenon where higher expectations placed on individuals or groups leads to an improvement in their performance. It occurs when someone believes in another's potential and communicates those expectations, which, similar to the Gollum effect, influences the individual's behavior and achievements, but in a positive way, because people tend to rise to the level of expectations set for them. An example of this would again be seen in a classroom setting where a teacher believes certain students are exceptionally capable and provides them with more attention and encouragement than others. As a result, those students may perform better, fulfilling the teacher's expectations. And another psychological phenomenon that can heavily impact people's behavior is something called de-individuation. This is where people lose their sense of personal identity and become more likely to engage in behaviors they normally wouldn't, often because they feel anonymous in a group setting. The loss of self-awareness occurs when people feel they're part of a large crowd, leading to diminished accountability and an increased likelihood of acting impulsively or aggressively. For example, during a large protest or riot, individuals may engage in destructive behaviors because they feel hidden within the crowd. This phenomenon can also occur online where the lack of direct consequences lowers inhibitions. And speaking of internet behavior, social contagion is another psychological phenomenon which can easily be witnessed through people's online activity. This is where behaviors, emotions, or ideas spread through groups of people, much like how a virus does. It occurs when individuals are influenced by the actions, emotions, or beliefs of others, often without conscious intent. Social contagion can manifest in various forms, such as the adoption of trends, the spread of anxiety, or even the escalation of group behaviors like panic or excitement. An example can be seen in how social media trends quickly go viral, with people sharing challenges, viral videos, or news stories, often causing massive shifts in behavior. Another instance is when emotions like sadness, fear, or anger spread amongst people who all happen to get their information from the same sources. And another factor in people's tendency to copy the behaviors of others is something called social proof, a psychological phenomenon where individuals look to the behaviors and actions of others to determine their own, especially in uncertain situations. This effect is rooted in the idea that people tend to assume if others are doing something, it must be good or something they themselves should do. This reliance on the behavior of others can sometimes lead to a herd mentality where people make decisions they normally wouldn't if not for seeing other people make them. An example of social proof would be people condemning or shunning an individual from society, sometimes even unjustly, solely because they see other people are. And this works in the reverse as well, where people all favor an individual, or a restaurant, a song, or a product, for example, just because everyone else is. Does anybody remember the Stanley Cup craze? Or how about when that new guy showed up at school, and once one girl showed interest in him, suddenly every other girl wanted him too? Let us know any other positive or negative examples of this you can think of down in the comments. In a similarly related phenomenon that many of us experience regularly, especially since the invention of the internet and social media, is FOMO, or fear of missing out. This is a common emotional response where people feel anxious or uneasy about missing exciting or rewarding experiences that others might be having. What's often triggered by social media, where people consistently see highlights of others' lives, vacations, parties, and successes, which can create the illusion that everyone else is living better or more fulfilled lives than they themselves are. This perception can lead to dissatisfaction, insecurity, and sometimes poor decision-making as a result of these negative feelings. But moving on to the next phenomenon, this is another very common but pretty bizarre one. It's called the chameleon effect, and it's basically the tendency of individuals to unconsciously mimic the behaviors, gestures, and speech patterns or attitudes of the people around them. This social phenomenon happens as a way of facilitating smoother interactions and building rapport, and often happens without people even realizing they're doing it. Have you ever spent time with someone or a group of people and then suddenly noticed everyone seems to be speaking with the same cadence? Well, that's the chameleon effect, and it's thought to promote social bonding and increase likability, as mirroring someone's behavior can make them feel more comfortable or understood. Another example would be two people meeting each other for the first time and unintentionally adopting each other's hand gestures. Or sometimes it goes as far as one person unintentionally copying the accent of the other. And similar to the chameleon effect is something called emotional contagion. This phenomenon refers to when emotions are transferred from one person to another, often unconsciously. It occurs when we catch the feelings of others around us, whether positive or negative. It tends to happen because humans are naturally empathetic, and through nonverbal cues such as facial expressions, vocal tone, or body language, we can experience emotions similar to those we observe in others. For example, if someone enters a room feeling excited and enthusiastic, their energy might quickly influence the mood of others nearby, making them feel upbeat as well. Similarly, if a person is visibly upset, their negative emotions can spread, affecting the atmosphere in the room as well. And this next social phenomenon is something you've likely experienced without even realizing it, and it may have even caused you problems. It's called a fundamental attribution error, which is a cognitive bias where people attribute the actions of others to that person's character or personality while overlooking situational factors that may have influenced those actions. In contrast, when evaluating their own behavior, people often tend to consider only external circumstances rather than internal traits. An example of this would be somebody having a poor attitude while interacting with you in public. You might just assume they're a rude, inconsiderate person, ignoring the possibility that their bad mood stems from a recent tragedy they experienced. On the other hand, if you yourself have a poor attitude due to a recent negative experience, you might justify it by saying you're just having a bad day. Fundamental attribution errors often lead to misunderstandings and misjudgments when people interact in society. And another similar phenomenon is something called a self-serving bias. This is the tendency of people to attribute their successes to their own abilities or efforts while blaming external factors for their failures. This helps people to protect their egos and maintain a positive self-image. For instance, a woman who receives a raise at her job might attribute it to her hard work and intelligence. However, when she doesn't earn the promotion she's after, she might attribute that to misogyny or unfair practices on the part of her employer, unwilling to consider she was less qualified for the job than someone else. Self-serving bias can boost confidence but can also hinder personal growth by preventing individuals from acknowledging areas where they need improvement. Recognizing the bias, however, can help one develop a more balanced and realistic view of their abilities and achievements. Next, let's talk about something called social facilitation, a phenomenon where the presence of an audience can have a positive or negative impact on an individual's performance. Basically, when people perform tasks in front of others, their performance can be enhanced for simpler, well-practiced tasks, as the presence of an audience often increases motivation. However, this effect can be negative for more complex or unfamiliar tasks, as the pressure of being watched can cause anxiety and impair the performance. For example, a professional athlete might perform better in a game with an excited crowd cheering them on. while a novice in that same situation may feel overwhelmed and choke under the pressure. Next on our list is something called normative social influence. This refers to the act of conforming to the expectations and norms of a group in order to be accepted or liked. This type of influence occurs when individuals change their behavior, attitudes, or beliefs to align with those around them, even if they don't necessarily agree with the group. The desire for social acceptance and fear of rejection often drives this behavior. For example, in a high school setting, a student might start wearing certain clothes or using specific slang to fit in with a popular group, even if it doesn't reflect their personal style or preference. This phenomenon can lead to people suppressing their true selves to avoid standing out. Another type of influence that leads to conformity is something called informational social influence. This occurs when individuals look to others for guidance in uncertain situations, believing that those people have more knowledge or insight than they themselves do. This type of influence leads people to conform to what they believe is correct or accurate based on the assumption that others possess better information. Unlike normative social influence, which is driven by the desire for social approval, informational social influence is motivated by the need for clarity or accuracy. For example, if someone's unsure of the proper way to behave in a formal event, they may observe others and follow their lead, trusting that their actions are appropriate, relying on them to provide a sense of direction. And this next social phenomenon is something I'm sure most, if not all of you, have experienced at some point in your lives. It's called social loafing, which is the tendency of people to exert less effort when working in a group than while working alone. This phenomenon occurs because people feel less accountable for the outcome of a group task, assuming others will pick up the slack, and as a result, group productivity may suffer. A very common example of this would be a team project at work or in school. One person may do most of the work while others contribute minimally, believing that their lack of effort won't be noticed. And this next social phenomenon is something that could lead to very negative outcomes depending on the situation. It's called the bystander effect, which is where people are less likely to offer help to a victim when others are present. The presence of others can lead to a diffusion of responsibility where each person assumes someone else will step in to assist, resulting in no one taking action. This effect has been observed in numerous situations, including emergencies or accidents where people stand by and do nothing despite the obvious need for help. For example, if someone is being harmed in a crowd or on a train, bystanders might hesitate to intervene, assuming that others will, whereas if they'd been the only witness to the harm, they might feel more inclined to take action. Opposite of this is the reverse bystander effect, which essentially is a situation where individuals are more likely to take action because they believe others will also help. With the reverse bystander effect, the presence of others motivates individuals to act as they assume that the collective effort will make a greater difference. People might feel empowered by the group's potential or feel joining the person taking action is the right thing to do. For example, again, if somebody's being attacked on a train or in a crowd, one person intervening might compel others to join in and help them, whereas if that first person had never stepped up, neither would anyone else. This next group of social behavioral phenomenon speaks to why some people have the prejudiced views they do towards others in society. And the first is called in-group bias. This is the tendency of individuals to view members of their own group more positively than those in other groups. This bias can manifest itself in various forms, such as the assumption that in-group members are more trustworthy or competent than out-group ones. It's a natural psychological phenomenon that arises from the need to belong and desire to feel secure within one's own social circle. For example, people may tend to favor others of the same gender, race, or political party, offering them more grace, opportunities, and support, while overlooking or dismissing people of other races, genders, or political affiliations. And another similar phenomenon to this is out-group bias, which is the psychological tendency of people to perceive members of groups they don't belong to as more similar to each other than they truly are. This basically means people view others of groups they don't belong to as all being the same, while viewing their own group as diverse and complex. Such thinking can lead to harmful stereotypes and unfair generalizations. This bias reinforces division and an us versus them mentality, especially during times of conflict or social tension. Another related phenomenon to this is something called in-group favoritism. This refers to the tendency of people to favor or show preferential treatment to members of their own group over those in other groups. It can manifest itself in various ways, including positive evaluations or greater empathy towards those who share a common identity, such as nationality, religion, or social affiliation. This phenomenon is rooted in evolutionary psychology, where cooperation within groups could enhance survival. And an example of this in action would be a teacher of a certain gender, consciously or unconsciously being more lenient when grading students who share their own gender and more biased or harsh in their grading of students who are of the opposite gender, with the result of this biased behavior being long-lasting negative effects. The opposite of in-group favoritism is out-group favoritism, which, as you might have guessed, occurs when individuals show preferences towards members of groups they don't belong to, rather than favoring the ones they do. This bias can result in more favorable treatment, trust, or positive evaluations of out-group members, sometimes to the detriment of in-group ones. An example of out-group favoritism can be seen in certain political or social contexts where people might support policies or individuals from groups they don't belong to, even if it means disadvantaging their own group. Out-group favoritism can have both positive and negative effects based on the context and which group is being favored. But that's it for this list, so subscribe to support the channel or check out another video now for more interesting content, and follow me on X at EI Explained or Instagram at Everything Interesting Explained. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time for more Everything Interesting Explained.